We're going to spend some time thinking about the setting of the play, The Tempest. As we know, the play is set on an island that's ruled over by Prospero. But the island itself is quite mysterious. We don't know very much about it. We don't know in particular where it is, and we don't know what it looks like. The different characters describe it in lots of different ways, so there are quite contrasting opinions about what it looks like. And Shakespeare has left it up to us as the audience to really use our imaginations and come up with our own interpretation of what this island might be like. Some of the characters talk about it as being somewhere that is very much like a desert and feels uninhabitable and inaccessible. So if something's uninhabitable, it must be very dry. No creature really could live there. There's probably nothing to shelter under. We know that Trinculo, when he first arrives on the island, he's slightly worried that there might be a storm coming, and he talks about the fact that there's nothing really to hide under. He talks about the land as being very barren, which means nothing is growing on it. So that's kind of one version of how the characters talk about it. Very much like a desert, very dry, nothing very much growing there. And also inaccessible means that it must be very far away from anywhere else, very hard to get to. Inaccessible also makes me think that it might be surrounded by rocks even, so it might be very hard to land a boat on the shore. Might be very dangerous if it's surrounded by rocks. But we do know that it probably has beaches, because we hear Ariel say to Ferdinand, come unto these yellow sands. And Gonzalo at one point describes it as being lush and green and having grass. So that's the opposite of a desert. So some characters see it in one way and some characters see it in another way. And we hear Caliban talking about the fact that there are springs. So there's obviously water kind of coming from places in the island and creating streams and rivers. He talks about picking berries and collecting wood, so there must be trees as well in some places. So it's very much up to you, kind of what you imagine it to be like, and whether you think that it's somewhere that feels like a tropical island that has beautiful beaches and like rainforest and creatures living on it, or whether you think that it does feel kind of dry and uninhabitable with nothing there, and just miles and miles of kind of arid desert sand. It's completely up to you, but what I would like you to do is imagine yourself on this island, imagine that you're exploring it, and think of some words that come to mind to describe what you're seeing, to describe the type of landscape. You might want to use words that describe the sounds that you might be hearing, and also how it might feel to be on that island. So have a think and come up with a selection of words that kind of inspire you to imagine what this island is. And I will. I've done it myself, so I'll read through what I came up with. It's a short list, but these are the words that I started to put together when I was thinking about what the island was in my imagination. So I've got hot, dry, mysterious, barren, isolated, peaceful, mirage, illusions, intriguing, lost, and dreamy. So those are my selection of words. I'm sure you can come up with some much more imaginative words than that. And as I said, you might want to include some words that describe sounds, which I haven't really done. You might want to include colours as well. You might want to write down some of the colours that you see in your imagination when you think of this island. So take a little bit of time to make that list. And then once you've made your list, we're going to start thinking of making ourselves a mood board. that's going to represent your idea of what the island looks and feels like. So it's going to capture the things that have inspired you. And we're going to do that by using some photos and some material. So you might have scraps of material at home, and if you do, that's great, and you can have a little rummage through those. If you don't, that doesn't matter. You don't have to use fabric and material. You can just use images, and you can use some of the words as well that you've come up with. You can draw some things yourself as well, but effectively we're going to use the things that we collect to make a collage. So a mood board is very much like a collage. It's a way of gathering lots of different materials that inspire us and that represent the things that are in our imaginations, and then we put them together and we place them on a sheet of paper. You could use a piece of cardboard. You could also use a piece of plain fabric if you have that. Just something that you can kind of collect everything on, and think of a way in which you might want to attach it. So you can use sellotape, you can stick it down with sellotape or glue. You might want to, if you're able, you might want to staple, or you could ask, if you are using fabric, you could ask an adult to help you with some pins. Lots of different ways in which you can attach things, but we're going to think about what is representing the island to you. So I've got some photos here that I'm going to use, and I'll show you some of them just as a bit of inspiration. So this one in particular, I quite like. So this is actually a postcard that I have, that is a postcard of a squid, and I like the colours. I think the colours on here, the blue and the yellow in particular, really feature in what I imagine when I think of the island. But also I think the squid itself is quite interesting. It's quite unusual looking. So it made me think that on this island, which is a very unusual island, it might have some unusual creatures that swim in the sea around it. So I was really inspired by that, and I'd like to use that on my mood board. I also found this photo, so this was, I got this on the internet. So you can either use magazines if you have magazines at home, or you can go online and use Google, and maybe put in some of the words that you came up with on your list, and they might generate some photos that you particularly like. So this photo came up, I typed in the word mysterious, and this was one of the photos that came up. And I really liked this one because it felt like it really represents what Ariel might look like in my imagination. So here, Ariel, you can see Ariel, well, the figure in this photo is made from branches of trees and leaves, and that's something that I think that Ariel could be represented in that way if in the play. So I really like this, and I'd really like to use this on my mood board as well. The other thing that you can do is you can, if you've got an outside space, you can perhaps go and have a look if there's anything outside that inspires you that you might want to include on your mood board. So outside I found some branches that they'd just been, they'd just kind of fallen down from a tree outside, and I had a look at the branches, and the bark on the branches was quite easy to come off, so I just collected some of the bark, which I really liked. It kind of made me think of what the beach, made me think that the bark might have washed up on the beach. So I'm definitely going to use this. I think that, that's kind of, it sort of makes me think of a shipwreck, because of the wood of the ship. So I really like those, and I think that to me that says kind of beach, and also and it makes me feel like it might be an abandoned beach for some reason. So you might find things like that. You might have pebbles outside that you like and that you might want to include. It might be that you've got access to, if there are any leaves outside, you might want to include those. Anything that particularly inspires you, and it's easily accessible, and that you won't be damaging anything if you use it, then you can include those. Some other photos that I particularly liked that I found. So this one is a kind of misty, a swirling mist. So in my head, the island, I'm not particularly focusing on the island being lush and green and having lots of vegetation and lots of flowers and being tropical. I'm kind of thinking about the island as somewhere that might feel quite strange to be on, a little bit magical, maybe a tiny bit frightening as well. So this smoke made me kind of think, this kind of misty smoke made me think of, perhaps people get a bit lost in a fog at some points and they can't quite find their way around the island, so I'm going to include that as well. I've also got a selection of material here that I'm going to use on my mood board. So one of the pieces that I really like, that I found a bit of a scrap of, is this one. And the reason I like it is because of the pattern. I really like it was making me think of lightning, I suppose, more if you turn it this way. But you can see it's gold, slightly shimmering, and I felt that it represented the storm to me. So I'm going to cut out the shape of the zigzag so that I can include it to kind of have that feel of lightning. And also similarly, this piece of fabric, it sort of, in my head, it represents for me the night sky. A lot of the play in my imagination takes place at night. That may or may not be the case, but it certainly is the case for me and the way that I imagine the play. So this really felt like it kind of represents darkness, but a little bit, it's for me it feels magical, so it was making me think of a magical night sky, so I'm going to include a little bit of that as well. I've also got just some plain material here, you can see, but I like this because it feels sandy to me. It certainly, when I kind of came across it, I thought, oh yeah, that would be really a nice way of representing the sand, and that feeling of the beaches and perhaps the dry land on the inland. And what else do I have? Oh, I have this one, which is a little bit tropical, so I probably won't use, you can see it's got flamingos on it, which in my version of what the island might look like, I don't really imagine it to be that tropical, but I do see it having some plants, so there might be kind of little pieces of this fabric that I might use and dot around on my mood board just to represent a little bit of the fact that there might be some vegetation on the island. What else do I have? I also have some tissue paper. So again, there is a little bit of green. I am imagining bits of green. I've got a photo that is of this is of the Arizona desert, but it's very much what I imagine some parts of the island looking like. So you can see on there that there are little bits of shrub, little bits of things growing. So that's kind of how I imagine the island for me. As well as fabric, you might want to use recycled materials that you have around the house. So you could think of a way that you might want to use bottle tops that come from milk bottles. You might want to use foil, or if you have any cling film, there might be a way to use cling film. You can always paint things as well. You can use plenty of colour, as much colour as you want. You might even have things around the house that are objects that you particularly like the pattern of, or you might have plants that you think really represent what you think the type of plants on the island are. And if you can, you could take photos of these things. There's no reason why you can't use your own photos for your mood board. So you can have a look around the space that you're in, see what sparks your imagination, see what you might associate with the island. It might be that on maybe on an item of clothing you have a pattern that just really speaks to you and kind of reminds you of the beach, or something like that. So be as creative as you want in terms of where you find your inspiration and how you collect it, and yeah, collect it all together, assemble it however you want. You can assemble it and maybe think about, you might want to assemble it in the shape of the island. You might want to cut things out in specific shapes, to give a real sense of, again, that feeling of the island. So maybe I've definitely done a little bit of that myself. So I've kind of created some shapes of hills in the way in which I've cut some things out. I've made some zigzag shapes. So you can try different things out as well, and sort of see what things look like when you pair them with other images, and come up with the best way that you want to assemble them and finish off your mood board. Really looking forward to seeing what you create. Thanks very much.